Resident Evil 3 is the black sheep of the series. Capcom didn't give a shit about it when it was being developed, and they clearly don't now. My final reason why Resident Evil 3 should not get a remake is because the fans won't be happy. Fans won't be happy. Fans won't be happy. Fans won't be happy. Fans are criticizing the Resident Evil 3 remake hard. Fans won't be happy. Fans won't be happy.
I don't want his mother to see this.
But everywhere I went, people were terrified by my disfigurement. I have to wear this bag on my head because I'm hideously ugly.
Look how they messing with my boy.
GameSomniac tried to reveal the truth, but no one believed them.
The Resident Evil 3 remake has been widely anticipated by all after Capcom's success with the Resident Evil 2 remake. And although the Resident Evil 2 remake was a huge success, it still got served its fair share of backlash from those whom have been labeled purists, which has become something of a dirty slur these days. Now, I've never cared about Resident Evil 2 the way other fans drool over it, but that doesn't mean I don't consider it to be a great game. Resident Evil 2 is a phenomenal survival horror experience in its own right, but it's honestly not the best game in the series. For me, that would be Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Let me set the scene for you. The year was 2000, I was 8 years old, and in comes Dad home from work with a brand new video game just for me. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was my immediate source of nightmare fuel growing up. Where many's introduction to the franchise was a horrific game of escape from a monster-infested mansion, or traversing a secret underground facility filled with scientific creatures that defile the very essence of nature, my introduction to the Resident Evil series, however, was an 8-foot-tall hulking beast monster smashing through a police station window while carrying a rocket launcher hell-bent on seeing me dead no matter what the cost. Hey dudes and dudettes, I'm Derek with GameSomniac, and this is my review of the Resident Evil 3 remake. Now, I'm a bit of a purist myself when it comes to the third entry in the Resident Evil series, and I will fight tooth and nail without hesitation to hell and back to defend the game's honor online. But before we get started, there is a portion of the Resident Evil fanbase that's just purely toxic, and I'm taking this opportunity to shut them down. I'm talking, of course, about the people who cry and whine about how Resident Evil 3 is not the true Resident Evil 3, when it is, by definition, chronological order, etc. It doesn't matter that Resident Evil 3 started out originally as a side game and Code Veronica was supposed to be the third title. The simple fact is, Code Veronica alone as a game is a mess, and as it is, following Resident Evil 2 without Resident Evil 3 bringing the Raccoon City saga to an end with its iconic and memorable ending, it would have made for a lousy third title. You made a Claire standalone game, and fuck the whole Raccoon City incident and however that ended, because Claire's solo adventures are so much more interesting. Ha! Yeah, no. The sad truth of the matter is, Leon is the real star of Resident Evil 2. He had the better weapons, the better NPC interactions, a better scenario all around, and many fans prefer his scenario over Claire's. So, Code Veronica is what? Claire's redemption? Yeah, okay, because that's why Chris comes back to save the day and Wesker comes back as the series poster villain. Because the game needed, in all caps, needed that in order to be a successful entry in the series. Claire couldn't have done it on her own. And what, at the cost of creating an incoherent storyline which Resident Evil 3 does beautifully to bring to a close? Honestly, you should all praise Resident Evil 3 instead of bashing it. By Resident Evil 3 ending the Raccoon City saga, it opened the door for Code Veronica, allowing it to succeed in whatever capacity that was. The point is, Resident Evil 3 is the true Resident Evil 3. Get the fuck over it.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
Alright, so what's the difference between Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis? Well, for starters, it isn't a remake. It's a reimagining of the original game, and while I had originally preached that its design catered to the fans of Resident Evil 2, I'd actually like to retract that statement, because the Resident Evil 3 Remake fails to please them just as it fails to please diehard fans of the original title. It fails all around. The overall goal of the game's protagonist Jill Valentine remains the same, escape from Raccoon City, but a lot of the events from the original game that define Jill's escape have either been changed and or removed altogether. Memorable sections of the original title, like venturing through Raccoon City Park, the Graveworm boss battle, the Raccoon City Clock Tower, and Nemesis boss battle, and oh hey, even the Dead Factory, which I've yet to see anybody online mention, have all either been altered or cut out completely. Also missing from the game are the plethora of puzzles, which is an iconic staple that the Resident Evil franchise is known for, but almost non-existent within this remake. Now that's just a short consolidated taste of what we're going to be discussing in this review, and there's a lot to go over, so let's get into it and start by talking about the character redesigns. The Resident Evil 3 remake overall did a great job with the treatment of the characters, with the exception of two of them. Now, starting on a positive note, my favorite character in the remake is Nikolai. This is easily the most quintessential representation of the character since the original game's release in 1999. Now, in the original game, Nikolai is a bit older, kind of stocky, overall the typical evil Russian. In the remake, Nikolai is a bit younger, he's fit, he's in top peak physical condition, he's cunning, conniving, and to me his voice actor is on point.
Oh, what do we have here?
Nikolai, don't! The city needs that vaccine!
More than I do. I don't think the wisdom I've been trying to impart on you is getting through. Now, I know you can't put a price on life. But I'm in this business to get paid. So, let's make a deal. You go down there, battle the Nemesis, and I'll recall it all and sell the combat art. Put on a good show, and maybe I don't need a vaccine. Agreed? Good.
Now, the one thing I didn't like, and this is more of a personal nitpick, Nikolai in the remake was hired by an unknown client to record the data of the Raccoon City incident and see to it that Umbrella falls, which makes him more of a freelance villain, whereas in the original game, he was one of the Umbrella supervisors, posing as one of the UBCS mercenaries. I just feel like this unknown client thing could easily be Albert Wesker.
I'm Albert Wesker.
Which has become something of a crutch that Capcom uses when they don't know what to do with the game, but they really want to make their fan base nice and wet. Being a supervisor of Umbrella made Nikolai kind of like the physical embodiment of how dangerous Umbrella really was. The company operated in the shadows of the trust of the people, much like Nikolai did, and I don't feel like him just working for insert name here really holds the same power as him being a part of Umbrella. But again, I'm just nitpicking.
Farewell.
Mikhail, or as Jill calls him,
Mikhail! Mikhail! Mikhail!
was as tough as nails in the original game, but took a back seat mainly due to his injuries. In the original game, we get to see Mikhail struggle with the death of his men who were unable to stop the zombie hordes and failed to save any civilians. Even on the verge of death, Mikhail still fights, and in a moment of true badassery, sacrifices himself so that Jill and Carlos could live.
Jill, get out of the cable car now!
Mikhail, wait, don't!
Get out of here! Hurry!
In the remake, Mikhail is just as tough as his original counterpart, but is in a much better mindset. He's injured, but that doesn't stop him from being a leader, delegating certain tasks between the remaining members of the platoon in an effort to get not only themselves to safety, but an assortment of civilians that they've managed to save and protect this time around. We don't get to see Mikhail fight in this version of Resident Evil 3, which is kind of a missed opportunity in my opinion. It would have been cool to see the subway become overrun with zombies who just happen to sniff out the civilians, and a wounded Mikhail kicks ass and takes names just like in the original. It's another good redesign that works in the character's favor, but the outcome of the character doesn't change and the overall purpose of the character doesn't change, so there's really nothing too new with the character. There's just more things for him to do this time around, making him a bit more interesting, but really doesn't do anything for the game. Even as a purist, I love Carlos's redesign. He looks fantastic, and that's not to say that there was anything wrong with his original design. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. Now, I can sympathize with those who felt the original Carlos was a bit too much of a pretty boy, because he was, and not so much in the game as much as his 3D render. But I don't understand the people claiming that he's a palette-swapped Leon Kennedy or Leon clone, because he's clearly his own character. Honestly, it's better to smile and wave at those kinds of people and just laugh at them on the inside. His new look reminds me a lot of bearded Kenshiro from the original Fist of the North Star feature film. Which is awesome, and his character is well represented here, unlike the last two Resident Evil 3 remakes, Operation Raccoon City and The Umbrella Chronicles. The one big difference with Carlos is that in the original, he was more boyish and immature. There were certain scenes in the original game that really painted Carlos with a tough exterior, but soft on the inside, and to his credit, he's only 22 years old in the original game. Before joining the UBCS, Carlos was actually a communist guerrilla and fought in his fair share of war zones throughout most of his teen years, so he's already had the experience and knowledge of warfare, but ultimately...
He's just a boy, poor little feller.
Now, as you progress through the game, you witness Carlos gain this sense of responsibility for Jill and their situation, while overcoming not only the physical threats that plague the city streets, but also fear and doubt. In the remake, Carlos is pretty much a man and a half from the get-go. Carlos doesn't really progress as a character in the remake like he does in the original. It's like his character stats are already maxed out, but his overall stats are about average. Now, to be fair, they don't use Carlos in the same capacity as they did in the original, so it doesn't really hurt his character by any stretch, but considering they completely reimagined the entire game, they didn't really do anything more for the character. Jill's character redesign also looked phenomenal, and even as a diehard fan of the original game, I still understood why they changed what they changed with Jill. I mean, honestly, it was inevitable. We knew that was going to be an issue from the start. I don't know how you couldn't expect them to not change Jill's hooker outfit, as it's commonly referred to. I mean, the reasons behind it make sense, and also the original outfits for both Jill and Carlos were included with the game, albeit they were included as pre-order bonus DLC, but still, I see no foul play. Jill is a firecracker in this game.
Surely a tall drink of water like yourself can put out a few flames.
Fuck you.
She's always pissed off, always giving someone attitude, and when I first saw her interaction with Carlos and Mikhail in the Resident Evil 3 demo, I thought they made her nothing more than a Miss Independent bitch.
Hey, Captain. This fine young lady could use our help.
Carlos, you didn't even think to ask fine young lady her name? She is an elite operative of RPD, Special Tactics and Rescue Service. Her name is something Valentine.
It's Jill.
Nice to meet you, Jill. I am UBCS Platoon Leader Mikhail Victor. My team was sent here to rescue civilians.
Right. How's that going for you?
The city is completely cut off, isolated. Most of the 100,000 civilians will wind up dead. Correction, undead. My platoon has suffered serious losses. Just keeping them alive is more than I can manage.
Well, you can thank your corporate overlords for that.
Yes. Well, we are doing all we can. If we can get this subway train moving, we can evacuate some survivors. But we need help. My men cannot do this alone.
All right. I'm in. But I am on their side, not yours.
Oh, hey. It's cool. We all want the same thing.
Thank you, Jill.
All right, Super Cop. Here you go. We can use this to stay in contact.
I know what a radio is.
Now, every time I say this, I'm met with the same reaction from all of the digital vigilante edgelords of the internet about how she's always been a tough badass and they would do the exact same thing if they were in her position and blah and yada fucking da. First, no, she wasn't. Not exactly. Secondly, no, you wouldn't. Remember, I'm comparing this Jill to the Jill of the original game, and the Jill in the original game wasn't flat out arrogant and bitchy. For example, when she first meets Mikhail, he's in a state of delirium plagued with images of the trauma he experienced when he lost his men to the hordes of the Undying. Jill can see that even though he's working for Umbrella, he's still human. A person in suffering, another victim of Umbrella. She was compassionate and tried comforting Mikhail. She didn't chastise him for working for Umbrella while the man's guts were falling out at his feet.
Oh, this looks bad.
They're coming. Get ready! Fire! Fire! Stay together!
Calm down. You're safe now. Everything is gonna be okay. Do you have some kind of death wish?
My people, they were wiped out by these monsters. I can't stop just because I'm wounded.
But can't you see those monsters are also the victims of Umbrella?
Are you accusing me of taking it out on them? You don't seem to understand something. We're not really involved with the company. There's no reason for any of us to take responsibility for this mess.
I know that. And right now, that's the only reason why I'm trying to cooperate with you.
Now don't get me wrong. I understand that that was just the demo and it's just a small portion of the game, and after playing the game in full, I'm happy with how she was portrayed. But think about it. Your first impression of Jill is this girl who's just so mad that nobody listened to her about Umbrella, so fuck you and thank your corporate overlords and I know what a radio is. It was a lot for a first impression, and wasn't at all what I was expecting, especially since I was trying to compare her to the original. It was just so far off. She came across like one of those stuck-up broads that like to rub it in your face whenever you do something wrong, and like to say I told you so when something didn't work, like instead of helping the situation, you're adding to the problem by being fucking obnoxious. Moving on, we've got Tyrell Patrick, whose redesign I also found to be quite refreshing. You see, in the original game, Tyrell was just a plot device used to progress the plot by informing the player that Nikolai is in fact a traitor and working against the group of survivors. His time in the game is pretty short, and we really have no idea what his character is about. The only way to learn more about his character is if you were to read from his official character bio, which indicates that he is around the age of 32 at the time of the Raccoon City incident. Tyrell is a monitor for Umbrella, whose sole mission is to gather intel, very similar to his remake counterpart. Now in the original game, Carlos meets the highly paranoid Patrick in the hospital, where Tyrell thought he would find more info on, if not the actual vaccine to the T-virus itself. Tyrell, unfortunately, is ambushed by Nikolai, who has been ordered to dispose of any vaccine samples, as well as any research on the vaccine, and is subsequently killed in one of two ways. If Carlos goes down to the basement level before the 4th floor, you'll find Patrick attempting to open a safe. His gun is trained nervously on a surprised Carlos, who previously knew nothing about Umbrella's observer unit. The safe turns out to be rigged with explosives, courtesy of Nikolai, and the explosion ultimately brings Patrick to his death. Now, if you encounter Tyrell on the 4th floor, Carlos will witness a confrontation between Nikolai and Tyrell, leading up to Nikolai eventually shooting Patrick. When questioned by Carlos, it's revealed that Nikolai is one of the Umbrella supervisors. He then trains his gun on Carlos, but before Nikolai can act, Tyrell pulls out a hand grenade and pulls the pin. Carlos runs for cover, and the resulting explosion sends Nikolai out of the hospital window. While his time in the game is short, you can't say Tyrell doesn't go out with a bang. Now, the remake has Tyrell interacting with Carlos and Jill a hell of a lot more, and he seems almost like Carlos's main man. He's frequently seen in the game checking computer systems and gathering intel, which suggests in the remake that his role as monitor, while still intact, is no longer a secretive position, but rather a necessary and important role that helps the platoon carry out any and all standard missions. I really liked Tyrell's personality in the remake. He was just pretty chill all the time, willing to go along with whatever as long as there was a chance it would work. He even establishes contact with the US government at the behest of Carlos and Jill after learning that a vaccine exists, which I can only imagine in that scenario with phones not working and all internet communications possibly down, would require some special communication uplink. Something I'm sure he had to MacGyver together out of his asshole in order to make that shit work. He proved to be an essential character in the game, and I loved that. That was a good change. Alright, now that's 5 really well done redesigned characters that Capcom managed to do great things with, but with the good must also come the bad. According to Capcom, these next 2 characters that I'm going to talk about were promised to serve a much bigger purpose in the game, but this would be a promise Capcom never makes good on. Let's start with Dario Rosso. Dario Rosso in the original game was an NPC that Jill encounters right at the beginning of the game when she takes shelter in an old warehouse in order to escape from the zombies outside.
Okay, we've got to get out of here.
What? What do you think you're talking about? I just lost my daughter out there! How dare you tell me to go back outside?
I'm sorry about your daughter, but there isn't gonna be any rescue. We have to get out of here!
No! I'm not going anywhere! I'd rather starve to death in here than be eaten by one of those undead monsters! Now leave me alone!
Dario is hysterical. Jill informs him that there isn't going to be any rescue and they need to evacuate immediately, but Dario ain't having none of that shit. He barricades himself in a storage tanker, exclaiming that he'd rather starve to death in the warehouse than be eaten by zombies. Now you have to understand, the original Resident Evil 3 was designed to induce paranoia in the player. I mean, for somebody who hadn't played any of the previous installments, these NPC testimonies really built up the tension. Now, Scorpion on YouTube, great channel by the way, you guys should check him out, has a lot of videos and takes a lot of time to talk about the Resident Evil manhwas and how they tie into the games, and even he mentioned that the developers of the Resident Evil 3 Remake should have taken a page from the graphic novels when making this game. One of the things he mentioned that they should do with Dario, and I agreed with this 110%, was introduce the player to Dario's family so we can witness their demise and really feel for the character. You see, in the original game, Dario lost his daughter to the zombies while trying to escape, and in the manhwa, he actually loses his wife and very young daughter, whose age prior to the manhwa was never touched on. And the manhwa was genius, because when you played Resident Evil 3, you think of Dario as just another victim, but in the manhwa, he's a fucking monster, just as bad as the zombies, because he is the reason why they died. He blames the zombies, but he actually sacrifices his family to the zombies so he can get away from the zombies, and it's a fucking missed opportunity that the developers did nothing with this. Oh, by the way, that's all spoilers if you guys haven't read the manhwas but you want to read the manhwas, so don't watch that part of the video. Or if you already watched, you guys probably already watched the video, just forget about it. Don't just forget I even said anything. It never happened. There's no mention of a family or daughter in the remake. Dario is an old geezer, hiding out in a warehouse, and Jill tries to convince him to go with her to the rooftop of the parking garage where there's a chopper ready to evacuate them, and instead, we get an updated version of Dario locking himself in the storage container. Whoa, look out, Capcom's getting really fucking creative over here. It's a fucking glorified cameo, and the game is so linear that you never go back to check on Dario like you could in the original. So not only did they do nothing new with the character, they completely degraded the original experience. It's something that they could have excluded from the game entirely, and it wouldn't have made a fucking difference to the game.
Kawata-san doesn't want to talk about it too much, but apparently Dario is going to have a much larger role than he did in the original. Dario is in the game, Kawata says.
Alright, I've been pretty tame up until now, but Brad Vicker's redesign absolutely pisses me off, completely twists my tits, and I'm appalled at how many people were okay with this mediocre, simplistic cop-out that Capcom just bukkakied all over us. Brad has always been and always will be a coward.
No! Don't go!
He left the STARS team to die in the Arklay Mountains before growing a spine and coming back for them, and in the original game, he was a scared, nervous wreck. In the remake, he's a tall, cockin', walkin', big shootin' Billy Badass. He has all of his wits about him, and he takes charge after Jill's narrow escape of the Nemesis. Brad's death in the original game, while not only memorable and absolutely terrifying, served an incredible purpose, and Capcom completely shit all over it with the redesign of Brad Vickers, who once again was promised to have so much more involvement in this game than he had previously, and once again, it was a fucking lie. And get this, he has less screen time in the remake than he did in the original game. He actually dies quicker in the remake than he does in the original. He's a STARS member that the Nemesis has no interest in, at least not that we can see anyway, because from the start of the game, Nemesis only ever chases Jill around. Also, are we supposed to assume that Brad had interactions with the Nemesis prior to him coming after Jill? How did Brad know there was an 8-foot-tall humongoloid coming after STARS members?
Hello?
Jill, are you okay?
Brad, is that you?
Listen, you gotta get out of there.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now.
All right, let me grab my...
You okay?
What was that thing?
Damned if I know. But right now it's got a hard-on for the only 2 stars left in town. You and me. Bullshit.
Brad was already outside Jill's apartment when all this went down, mind you. Honestly, if I didn't know any better, I'd say Brad is a fucking double agent working for Umbrella, which in the grand scheme of things would have been so much more fucking interesting than him getting bit by zombies in Jack's bar, and then, and I say this both sarcastically and loosely, also with quotations, sacrifices himself, buying Jill enough time to slip out the back undetected. Brad doesn't sacrifice shit. Mikhail made a sacrifice. Brad decided to hold the respawn button like in Borderlands when the game gives you a chance to get a second win, but sometimes you know you can't beat the enemy in time, so you hold the respawn button like a fucking loser. People are mistaking Brad's actions as a sacrifice, and it's not. When you make a sacrifice, you often gain something at the cost of losing something. Brad was dead the moment he got bit. He sacrificed nothing. Sure, he could have kept fighting with Jill a little longer, but he still at some point would have been transformed by the virus, ultimately becoming a liability to the safety of Jill and the other survivors. Mikhail laid his life down without hesitation, like a badass, in an effort to give Jill a chance to live on. He wasn't infected, he wasn't disabled. He still could have served a purpose if he had lived and aided Jill in her escape, unlike Brad, but instead, he decided to try to take out the Nemesis. Brad's redesign is a fucking joke, a bad joke. In the original game, he introduced the player to the idea that something terrible and horrifying was out there looking for the player.
Brad, hang in there. Why isn't someone doing something about this?
I didn't know you were still alive, Jill. The police aren't trained for this kind of situation. What could they do? Listen, he's coming for us. We're both gonna die.
What are you saying?
You'll see. He's after STARS members. There's no escape.
Something worse than zombies, something unstoppable, and when they both arrive at the RPD, the horrors Brad preached are fully realized as the hulking giant falls into frame. He stalks Brad into a corner and forces a parasitic tentacle through his mouth and out the back of his head. For first-time players, this was enough of a nope situation for them to put down the controller and reevaluate their life's choices. Even for seasoned Resident Evil players, this memorable scene was the introduction to one of, if not the best antagonist the Resident Evil series has ever seen. Brad's character in the original was essentially a plot device used to plant fear into the player, and then demonstrate the power of the game's nightmarish antagonist that you would forever be forced to endure throughout the remainder of the game. It's a fantastic scene that was absolutely disregarded in the remake in favor for the chance to fix a continuity error between Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. I can't for the life of me understand why everybody is pissing themselves over a zombified Brad speaking. He told Marvin, "I'm sorry," which when you really break down the scene, Brad isn't speaking with a conscious mind. He's not telling Marvin he's sorry for being a zombie and about to attack him. Marvin says to Brad, "I'm sorry," because Marvin's about to put him the fuck down. And dumb zombie Brad just repeats what he hears.
Come on, man. Not you too. Sorry.
The fuck you say to me, you little shit?
It's a watered down, mediocre scene, and people today seem to be okay with mediocrity. But you know, with a little creative thought behind it, they could have taken the stories from the memos featured in both the remakes and the original games and brought them to life. We could have witnessed Marvin's band of officers fighting through the RPD until only he, Elliot, Rita, and oh shit, hey, how about Kevin from Resident Evil Outbreak? Until they are the only ones left standing. We could have relived that fantastic ending scene from the Desperate Times scenario in Outbreak File 2, with some certain rearrangement in order to fit the continuity of the remake's timeline, but still it would have been some awesome fan service, and I can't help but feel like that would have gotten a bigger pop in the end than Zombie Brad. Also, I feel the need to mention, Brad was designed to be a super zombie, and the Nemesis carries a super strain of the T-virus known as the NET virus. So when you look at the grand scheme of things, it only makes sense that he becomes a super zombie in the original Resident Evil 2, because in Resident Evil 3, he's infected with the NET virus strain. Without any infection from the Nemesis, this whole super zombie Brad who harnessed the power of speaking is absolutely idiotic. Sorry. Folks, I wish I could say my disappointment with the game ends here, but it doesn't. The biggest concern I had regarding the Nemesis when the remake was first announced was whether or not he was going to be a watered-down discount shadow of his former self, and he kind of is, but he isn't. I have this love-hate relationship for the Nemesis of the remake because he's kind of cool, he tries hard, but you can tell he's the milkman's kid, you know what I mean? And even though you know the truth that he's the bastard son, like a man, you stuck around and raised him like one of your own, but you hate him because all you'll ever see in him is the milkman banging your wife while drinking all your milk. I guess the best way to describe it is, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Because the creature's true potential is never realized in the game, something that Sphere Hunter also touches on in her review. In Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, he was a horrifyingly relentless brute that would always show up at the most inopportune time to rightfully fuck your shit up. The Nemesis in the remake also does this, kind of, for like, maybe the first 45 minutes before he's turned into a walking scripted plot device. I was so worried that they were going to copy Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 and paste him into the game without any effort being put into his AI, that I didn't realize there were worse things that could happen. The Nemesis of the remake holds his own very well from the time he's introduced until you reach the clock tower. After that, it's a downhill shit slide and you're at the bottom with your mouth wide open. Overall, Nemesis in the remake is reduced to nothing more than being a mascot making glorified cameos in the form of scripted events. And oh man, I can hear it now. But Derek, Nemesis was scripted in the original game. I don't know why you guys have lisps, but you do. And also, no, he wasn't. I mean, he was, but it was completely different. Scripted events in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis introduced a confrontation between the player and the Nemesis, usually followed by a choice that would ultimately alter the game's overall experience. Once this confrontation is introduced, the player is free to fight or run from the Nemesis, but during that time, Nemesis is free to think for himself. His AI isn't limited to actions programmed in a cutscene like, for example, the rocket launcher chase scene in the remake. The Nemesis is real until you either put him down twice or leave the area, and sometimes even leaving the area didn't guarantee safety. Like in the original game, you have simple encounters with the Nemesis that plays on the player's fight or flight instincts, but then you also have actual boss battles. Now, the Nemesis boss battles in the game aren't terrible, but they feel extremely basic. There's a lot left to be desired. Are they fun? Sure, I suppose. I mean, one boss battle includes you running around a flaming rooftop while Nemesis is shooting fucking fireballs into the air like a mortar. So there's that. This followed by Nemesis hunting you down with his iconic signature rocket launcher, which is sadly only ever used once in this scripted chase sequence, never to be seen again.
What about the clock tower battle? That must have been the tits, right?
I mean, it's more of the same, except Nemesis is a dog now because, like James McAvoy, he too can change his physical anatomy out of sheer will. Get it? Guys, did you get it? It's an M. Night Shyamalan reference. Guys? I gather around, kids, because we're going to have us a little come to Jesus. Scorpion on YouTube also touched on this in his own Resident Evil 3 Remake review video, which talks about how the Nemesis in the remake acts a lot like a G-monster because of the radical style of mutations the Nemesis experiences, when the reality is, he's a creation of the combined efforts of the T-virus and an NEA parasite, thus he's completely incapable of these insane G-like mutations. And I have to agree with Scorpion 110% on this. And I'm not arguing that Nemesis in the original game didn't transform, therefore it's nothing like the original game. I'm simply arguing that even though the NEA parasite produces a secretion that allows exposed tissue to mutate in order to become tougher, the mutations that take place in the remake are insanely exaggerated. Let me break it down for you. In the original game at the clock tower, Jill damages the Nemesis limit breaker, which causes him to come back more fierce and ruthless than ever before. He doesn't transform into a dog mutant or some other new atrocity. He's still Nemi, just shirtless now, sporting some Jesus abs, and has the longest, hardest parasitic tentacles, the likes of which the world of hentai has never seen before. In the Dead Factory, you use acid to incapacitate the Nemesis, whose disfigured body is then disposed of into a bath of toxic chemicals which melt him down into this hulking blobfish that Jill faces at the end of the game. That's it! Those are his 2 transformations. He doesn't change his anatomy and become something else. He's not Meatwad. He has one small transformation, which is really just Nemesis going Kaioken times 10, and one big transformation, which did change his anatomy, but only due to the fact that his physical form was destroyed, no longer able to exist in the same manner it had previously. In the remake, Nemesis is injured in the train crash, I assume, because it's never really explained. He pops out of nowhere on fire quite suddenly, flailing around like Frankenstein, which is pretty fucking stupid when fire didn't seem to do jack shit to him in the beginning of the game. Now all of a sudden it's kryptonite, which results in him transforming into Gaul from Gorgoroth. Then you melt him down just like you did in the original game, but instead of this, he turns into...
Have you ever seen anything so incredible? The data on this would be worth millions. But, you know how it is. City's about to explode, and you can't put a price on life. Good luck!
Nikolai!
Giant mutant turd monster. Hey, can you guys turn that part of the wall into a butt? What about fart sounds? Can we afford fart sounds?
Please, Lord, help me to release this demon!
Now, some of y'all are going to get mad at this next part, and I really need you to just kind of like stick with me here. I personally believe the new transformations featured in the remake were done solely in this manner to cater to the Resident Evil 2 fanboys, and I say this because the first Nemesis transformation is a complete ripoff of Birkin's G4 transformation in the original Resident Evil 2. And the Nemesis Final Metamorphosis is extremely similar to Birkin's final form, with the only difference being that Nemesis still has a body, a head, as well as like some arm appendages, where Birkin was all blob all the time. So actually it's kind of more like a cross between Birkin Blob and Alexia's final form from Code Veronica. I guess combining 2 monster forms together from previous games was just easier and less time consuming than, you know, actually being creative.
You... Jun... Ha!
Yes, you're doing it! Stay with it!
I mean, do I really have to mention that they put Nemesis in a fucking hefty bag? Now, Remake Nems utilizes a more diverse selection of weaponry. Not really. Even though it's never explained as to how he fucking gets them. Are they just lying around the city? Is there like a fucking Nemesis task force that comes down in a chopper and helps him gear up before every encounter? Man, it's a good thing Capcom took the time to reimagine Resident Evil 3, seeing as how broken and bad of a game the fucking original was. But once again, Nemesis is restricted to the confines of the script. He uses the flamethrower to set the construction site ablaze while Jill makes her way to the rooftop, narrowly avoiding the flames. Ooh, tension builder! By the way, Slippy Slides on YouTube has a great video exposing what the Nemesis AI does off camera, and let's just say it's fucking disappointing. It's one that I highly recommend you checking out, especially if you're a fan of Resident Evil and love looking at like the behind the scenes of the games, or even if you're an upcoming game developer. It's really good for you to watch to see how not to fuck up a video game. I'm gonna have the link in the description, you guys should go check it out. In conclusion, when you take into consideration everything that was put into Mr. X for the Resident Evil 2 remake, Nemesis is just wasted potential. Moving on. The Resident Evil 3 Remake has a very linear structure to its design. In the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, if I was at the trolley, I could backtrack all the way to the beginning of the game where we first meet Dario Rosso. Unfortunately, that's not the case this time around. Instead, players get to explore Jill's apartment as well as another section of Uptown, which looks more like downtown to me. I mean, Jack's bar is here, but the alleyway behind Jack's bar in the original game is outside of the auto shop where you meet Murphy Seeker. It's like they Frankensteined the original game's Uptown and Downtown, streamlining the whole thing. It's fucking silly. You guide Jill through this section of Uptown consisting of a dilapidated warehouse, which happens to be the warehouse from the original game where we first meet Dario, only to never be able to go back there again, a parking garage, and of course some city streets. Now during this time, you're trapped in a scripted chase scene between Jill and the Nemesis. There's no opportunity for exploration, and once Carlos brings you to the substation, you can never return. You're banished to another section of the city, which I can only imagine is the game's actual downtown, hence all the restaurants, grocery, and toy store. But really, the game glosses over Uptown and takes away any chance for the player to really explore the decaying city, witnessing its fiery descent into ruin. When you look at it, the game is cut in half compared to the original because they've shortened and ultimately cut so many scenes and locations from the original game. You can stay in downtown as long as it takes you to get the subway back up and running, but once you do, it's off to the clock tower, whose entire part of the game has been raped and beaten into one big boss battle sequence and nothing more. The original game also featured a well-placed battle at the clock tower, but not before some awesome scenery exploration and puzzle solving, which again is fucking absent for the majority of the game. And instead of utilizing the clock tower's chapel to house Jill safely away from the Nemesis and the undying dead, Carlos takes Jill to a hospital. The same hospital where Dr. Nathaniel Bard has been hiding, and since he's the keeper of the T-virus vaccine, taking Jill to the hospital is convenient to the plot. Also because she's injured. And because it's a hospital. The hospital is vastly different from the original game. It doesn't serve as a development site for any of the Hunter BOWs like in the original, which is weird considering this place is swarming with these little fuckers. After playing as the muscular man hero Carlos for a bit, we then return to Jill, and from there Jill takes a series of elevators beneath the hospital further down into the earth in order to arrive at our almost dear god when will it end final location. The ultra secret hidden beneath the hospital Umbrella Laboratory Science Facility place because we can't get enough of those. This generic underground facility takes the place of the Dead Factory from the original game. An awesome level, which I don't see anybody else even mentioning online. I'm the only person that seems to give a shit. Oh, I almost forgot. The game does throw the player into this umbrella warehouse place just before the laboratory, which is really nothing more than a copy and pasted area from the Project Resistance beta. All in all, we're not here long. It's an extremely generic and forgettable maze-style gauntlet level that ultimately forces the player to face all of the enemies of the game in one singular setting, which is kind of neat, I guess. It's kind of like when you're driving down the street and you see a car that's got a set of rubber balls dangling from the bumper, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. But you'd never do it to your car because, you know, you're not gay. The whole concept is cool, it's neat, but this could have been achieved in any setting. Like the Dead Factory! So in the end, changing the scenery from Dead Factory to generic warehouse / Umbrella Laboratory didn't really do anything for the game. The laboratory you find yourself in during the game's finale is generically bright white with every hallway looking the same. I hate this fucking place. It's filled with tight corners, a cheap mini hunter boss fight, and... oh. Pale heads. These ungodly fucking discount regenerators from Resident Evil 4 that give me Rubber Johnny flashbacks.
We're not really getting anywhere, are we, at the moment? Don't breathe like that, it'll make you feel really strange.
Then we find ourselves descending deeper into this fucking hive facility with nothing really memorable or special happening around the player. It's just the player traversing downward and downward in this white and gray and black color palette environment only to complete the objective and then backtrack all the way to the fucking top. Honestly, running around back and forth between two locations in a survival horror game is to be expected, but that's really all this game is. Its locations offer nothing more than changing up the game's pace while giving you something else to look at in order to break up the monotony of running around. After synthesizing the vaccine, there's another boss battle with the Nemesis featuring a big hole in the ground surrounded by a gigantic electric I don't fucking know. And it's my guess that the fight is supposed to resemble the boss fight in the trash compactor at the Dead Factory. But you know, more updated and fucking hip. Kids still say hip? Is that still cool? After the garbage dump boss fight, we're brought back to this nice shiny white, gray, black palette laboratory place where the final boss fight commences, and here's the thing. The area is clearly built to cater to the boss fight within the game. Like, outside of the game, I can't see this area serving any purpose to Umbrella in terms of the development and testing of a high-powered fucking rail cannon that will blow a hole into literally anything. Like, that's my whole problem with the final laboratory level in Resident Evil 3 Remake. It's just an underground lab because they wanted it to be a secret underground lab. But there's nothing special about it. It doesn't accent the game, it doesn't add any fucking pepper to it. At least with the Dead Factory, it served a purpose outside of the game. It was a rundown factory in Raccoon City, serving as one of Umbrella's many secret facilities where the development, testing, and disposal of BOWs took place. Civilians probably saw the factory every day but had no idea that the whole building was a front for devious activity. See, the developers missed the fact that the Umbrella Corporation is lying to everyone. The company is like a predator itself, lying and deceiving its prey. A secret underground lab automatically spells out evil company doing diabolical shit. It's a dead giveaway. A dilapidated and broke down factory in a little mountain town at first glance seems straightforward enough, but really it's another one of Umbrella's deadly lies. Umbrella using seemingly normal business buildings to conduct illegal activities is much more devious and says a lot more about the entity than the underground lab that spells out the whole fucking thing. And honestly, it makes sense. Do you know how expensive it is to build an underground laboratory? You have to take into account materials, prep work, hire the contractors. Fuck, pulling the permits alone is a job itself. And how are you going to explain the construction of an underground structure like that to Deborah in the zoning department? I'm supposed to believe that the Umbrella Corporation has a bunch of these underground facilities just lying around? With the amount of underground laboratories in the Resident Evil franchise, the Earth should be fucking ready to collapse in on itself due to all the tunneling. The Spencer Mansion has an underground laboratory. Resident Evil 2 has an underground laboratory. Like, that's it. There's only 2 underground laboratories on the fucking Monopoly board. That's it. You're done. And really, that's one too many underground laboratories in my personal opinion. Resident Evil 3 Remake's gameplay is really no different from that of the Resident Evil 2 Remake. Game mechanics are pretty much identical with the exception of Resident Evil 3, including the dodge mechanic, which I have to laugh as it's no different from the original game's dodge mechanic, although everyone seems to think it's better because there's one less button to press. Okay, so as I was editing this review, I was looking at some gameplay of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis Online when I found this ultra-talented gamer who had created an emergency dodge tutorial explaining the multiple ways to dodge and how best to use them in-game, maximizing your overall efficiency while playing. Now, in the 20 years that I've been playing this game, I did not know that there were 2 different ways to dodge. I only ever dodged enemy attacks whilst I was aiming because I'm a reckless Resident Evil 3 player. I mean, sometimes you gotta roll the dice. You got an enemy coming at you that will only go down after 50 shots with a handgun, and they're closing in fast. You gotta get as many shots off as you can. Who's got time to pop off 2 shots on Mr. Nemesis just to run in a circle and do that shit over, you know what I'm saying? So sometimes I'll go for an extra shot and execute an emergency dodge instead. Now, I'm sure somebody in the comments has already held this against me. I mean, it's YouTube. You'd have a better chance of getting a blowjob from Melina in Mortal Kombat and walking away with minimal blood loss. And that goes for the girls as well, it's not just the guys. Girls also have a better chance of getting a blowjob from Melina in Mortal Kombat and walking away with minimal blood loss than being wrong on YouTube and nobody shitting on you for it. Anyway, I was wrong, there are more than 2 ways to dodge, this YouTuber Small Vex is friggin' awesome, back to the review. The reality is, both mechanics rely on timing. In the original game, in order to perform a successful dodge, you had to press and hold R1 and hit the X button at the precise moment an enemy attacks in order to dodge. Fairly simple concept that a lot of people seem to have trouble with. I don't know why, it always worked for me. But then again, I was also able to master the trigger mechanic in Final Fantasy VIII, where pressing R1 at the precise moment your character attacks the enemy would grant you a critical hit, so for me it must have just made sense. In the remake, they've given the action of dodging its own button on the PS4, which is the R1 button. Pressing this button will cause Jill to jerk rapidly in the desired direction as dictated by the player in order to evade incoming danger. However, doing this at just the right moment will also execute a perfect dodge, which will also grant the player a few extra seconds of game time slowed down, allowing the player to get a few shots off on their attackers. Now, in that respect, it is a modification that has optimized the overall mechanic, but regardless, the mechanic still relies on the player's sense of timing. Which is why I laugh, as the exclusion of one extra button doesn't change the fact that you still need to be Johnny on the spot when it comes to knowing when to push the button. Now, Carlos has also been given his own unique ability, and the player can activate this ability by also using the R1 trigger. When pressed, Carlos is then able to tap into his Mighty Man Might and deliver a brute force punch of reckoning. A move that hasn't been seen in a Resident Evil game since Chris Redfield was punching boulders in Resident Evil 5.
Hold on, Sheva!
Don't get excited though, it's not a scripted attack. The attack can be interrupted by other enemies, and if you don't land the punch directly on target, you won't get a critical hit. Honestly, failure to execute this move precisely could leave you dead or damn near close to it depending on the enemy. Exploding red bales also make their return in the Resident Evil Remake, as well as busted up electric generators, which when shot by the player will cause a wave of electrical current to disperse, stunning nearby enemies including the Nemesis. While the electric generators are a welcomed godsend, there's one thing about the game's mechanics that really grinds my taint. Depending on how you have the camera angled, you cannot open doors, aim, or dodge. There have been several times I've sprinted with the camera in front aimed behind me, and I'll hold L2 to set up an aim, only for Jill to cancel the aim and continue running, or she won't aim at all. This is bullshit. This is what bad game design looks like, kids. My pressing the L2 button should instantly cancel out my sprinting. I mean, bring me to a walk if anything, but still should allow me to take aim right then and there. It's fucking jank and I do not appreciate it. If the game was going to act like this, then we should have just gone back to the old days of tank controls and allowed no movement while aiming. I mean, I can work with that, but I need the fucking mechanic to work. At least in the original game I could 180 quick turn and aim. It takes so fucking long in these remakes to set up for an attack. By the time you do, you've already gotten caught in the enemy's attack cycle, which clearly doesn't cost the enemy any stamina points because they fucking spam it over and over. Nemesis. And the fucking character reaction animations are so drawn out you'd rather just die. Just fucking reload your last save right now. Sometimes I'm running away from the Nemesis and I'm trying to reload my gun while looking behind me to see where he is, and Jill won't load the gun. I've never before played a game where the functionality of your character's mechanics are dictated by the fucking camera angle. Nothing else seems to be optimized or overhauled for this new installment, setting it apart from its predecessor, which is a shame as it feels like an exact copy and paste of Resident Evil 2. You see, a little extra time and effort towards giving Resident Evil 3 its own unique mechanics really could have set it apart from the Resident Evil 2 remake, and possibly even changed the fans' perception of the game as being nothing more than just Resident Evil 2 DLC. Now, the game's story at its core still remains the same as the original. Jill Valentine attempts to escape Raccoon City while being stalked relentlessly by a seemingly unstoppable killing machine sent by the Umbrella Corporation, whom are looking to eradicate all traces of their involvement in the incident. During these events, she befriends a male companion named Carlos, and after their escape, Jill and Carlos marry and live happily ever after. Carlos becomes a stay-at-home mom while Jill gets a job as a private eye, working all the time and never helping Carlos at home with the kids. Okay, I made that last part up, but you know it's true. Carlos is Jill's bitch.
Jill and Chris forever!
Hey, you can just fuck on out of here, buddy. That's why George Romero got fired from the Resident Evil movie. Tried to make Jill and Chris a couple. The story is virtually the same, however the events that take place during all of this have pretty much been reimagined and rewritten by Capcom's team of best-selling authors. Now, some events have slight differences, others have just been changed completely. Jill still works with the UBCS to get the trolley/subway train working so that they can leave Raccoon City. However, in the original game, the plan was to go to the clock tower, signal an emergency evac helicopter on the outskirts of town, and now in the remake, Nemesis fucks up your escape and the train just happens to crash a little ways from the clock tower. One of the smaller differences of this event is that the subway train is now carrying numerous survivors, all killed by Nemesis when he boards the train, whereas in the original, the trolley is strictly meant to carry Jill and the UBCS team to their next objective. Needless to say, one of the bigger changes of this event is the fact that the clock tower is no longer used in the same capacity as it was in the original game. It is now just an arena stage for an immediate boss battle, whereas before, in the original game, it was a complete segment. It was a whole scenario that you had to run through before ending with a boss battle. This is the perfect example of Capcom cutting events from the game. An entire segment of the original game cut and shortened to give fans more action, explosions, and gunplay. Something that we never asked for and frankly in the end couldn't give a shit about. Now surprisingly, there is one story element from the original game that has been expanded upon in the remake. I'm talking of course about the T-Virus vaccine. The game actually proposes to the player that a vaccine can be synthesized and with the help of the United States government can be mass produced and used on the citizens of Raccoon City. The alternative of course being the complete eradication of Raccoon City and all trace of the virus via a missile. It's interesting, I guess, because it's something new, especially the fact that they got in touch with Washington and actually talked them into holding out on the bombings so that they could actually try their hand at producing the vaccine and saving everybody. It's a cool idea and something I believe would happen in that scenario. I mean, in reality, you'd have to face the facts that these are freelance mercenaries working for a major corporate entity that probably wouldn't have the slightest idea how to do so. And looking at it from the government's point of view, why take the chance to save a few lives when you can just drop that big shiny problem solver on a town and be on the green by tea time? Because everybody in the government golfs for some fucking reason. It's an awful sport. Overall, the whole vaccine fiasco, while new to Resident Evil 3, still remains very reminiscent to the vaccine creation segment of the original Resident Evil 2. It was really nothing more than fluff to help pad out the game, make it seem longer. But in the end, the production of the vaccine does nothing to alter how the story plays out. There's no payoff for making it. It was a ruse, a red herring.
We've been tricked, we've been backstabbed, and we've been quite possibly bamboozled.
Thanks for playing. Alright kids, it's been a long journey, but we finally made it to the final thoughts portion of this review. And by now, it should be pretty apparent what I think of this game, but in case some of you went for snacks in the middle of the review and forgot to hit the pause button, I'll spell it out for you. Resident Evil 3 Remake, as a game, a blank survival horror title, is a good game. Not great, because it is extremely short and the bonus rewards you get after completing the game don't really add to the replay value, but it's definitely worth playing at least once, maybe twice. As a remake of the masterpiece that is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, it's an absolute shit show, an already dead horse with a broken leg that I can't stop shooting. Let's look at the pros. You've got great redesigns of almost all your characters, Carlos gets 2 scenarios this time, and that's it. Now let's look at the cons. Linear gameplay, shitty storytelling, cut content, nothing like the original game, Jill gets Rule 30 forward. You know what? Put that one on the pros list. Nemesis is so fucked. He's a scripted mess with a nose job. Fucking bitch can't even swim.
Bitch can't even swim.
Then there's this bullshit.
Keep going. We're almost there. No.
How the fuck did he get in there? What, is there a fucking doggy door somewhere? Come on! I knew this was gonna happen. I predicted it in previous videos. I have visual proof that gives me the right to tell all of you I told you so. But like Chief Irons and the rest of the Raccoon City Police Department, when the STARS team told them all what happened in the Arkley Mountains, nobody believed me. I was the asshole. I was stuck in the past, unable to accept change. Well, here we are. Who's the asshole now? The Resident Evil 3 Remake is a pure cash grab. There's no simpler way of saying it, and I told you, Capcom never really gave a shit about the game, which if it wasn't dyed in the wool before, it sure is now. Capcom carved that shit in stone with their most recent announcement that no further work will be done on the game. No future DLC releases are to be expected. The game's dead. They've moved on, folks, to bigger and better things, that is, whatever the fuck Resident Evil Village is. If you really want to break it all the way down and put shit into perspective, Capcom didn't care about remaking Resident Evil 2 until Invader Games took it upon themselves to remake it, and the fan response triggered Capcom to realize that, oh shit, there's money in this. Now, as I've said before, Resident Evil 2 is the fan favorite game of the Resident Evil series, and that's just a fact. Even though it was a cash grab, Capcom could not risk fucking it up, or else the fan backlash would have ruined them. And don't get me wrong, the Resident Evil 2 remake still had some minute backlash, but RE2 is a successful video game remake no matter how you look at it. Resident Evil 3 Remake did not receive that same courtesy. Now, supposedly the game was under development for approximately 3 years prior to its announcement in 2019, which, if it's true, that's fucking mind-boggling. The game's development was handled by Capcom with the assistance of its subsidiary K2 Incorporated, and from external companies such as Redworks and M2. Once again, Capcom left the development of the game in the hands of an outsourced third-party developer and dictated their expectations where and when it was needed. And for those of you telling me that I'm wrong because K2 Incorporated is a subsidiary of Capcom, that makes them part of Capcom, you clearly have never worked for a subsidiary before. Because you're meant to provide seamless service as you represent your parent company, but you are your own business business that conducts its own business that's still not invited to the parent company talent show or Christmas party. Don't defend Capcom, you owe them nothing. At this rate, they owe us more than we've given them over the last few years. The Resident Evil 3 remake is a tragedy for die-hard fans of the original game, but could be a pleasure for those who have never played the original. If you're new to the Resident Evil series, give it a shot. There's definitely fun to be had with the game. Again, it's just a terrible remake that offers nothing to die-hard fans other than empty promises and the everlasting echoes of small concessions.
You want stars? I'll give you stars!
No, Jill, I'm good. That line makes no sense here. It has nowhere near the same impact on players that it did in the original game. You threw it in here because you remember it's something that happened in the original game, something that fans really love, so we're gonna throw it in here so that fans will love this game too, but it just comes off as fucking silly. Sadly, the developers took the easy way out by deciding to rewrite the entire game and instead throw in meaningless Easter eggs all over the place to save them from having to do any real work. It's like the classic save room theme music. It doesn't fit as well in the remake as it did in the original, and this is mainly due to the remake's inability to immerse players in the depressing and foreboding atmosphere because it doesn't fucking exist. It's awful. The classic save room theme is supposed to be a welcoming of hope and safety to the player, but the environment outside of the save room isn't a depressive black void of hopelessness like it was in the original game. Behind the smoke and mirrors, the classic save room theme, the Railway Bros puzzle, classic costumes, these were all put in place to trick the Resident Evil fans into thinking Capcom cared and were developing a quality experience. I'm gonna be real with you guys. This remake is so bad that fans of the Resident Evil series who hate the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis hate this game more than the original. And that's an absolute scientific fact. I don't lie, except when I do. And when I do, it's because I work for fucking Capcom! That's it, I'm done. Please take a moment to appreciate the fact that this video was made out of 100% passion and hatred. GameSomniac's no longer part of YouTube's bullshit partnership program, and unless we use copywritten material that some no-name company who really doesn't own the rights puts a claim on, yeah, I know, why would something like that happen? YouTube's copyright system is fucking flawless, I know. Unless they put a claim on our video, we don't even allow YouTube to put ads on our videos. So this has all been done out of whatever drive I have left to entertain all of you, which isn't much after dealing with this abortion Capcom calls the Resident Evil 3 remake. I don't know if I'm gonna keep making videos anymore, but if I do, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye!